Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today about looking beyond London, finding the perfect fit for your child, which in many cases will involve boarding. So I am delighted to be able to introduce you to two people from boarding schools. I'll go on to them in a minute. Thank you for coming during lunch break. It's very kind of you to eat your sandwiches with us, and do relax about eating your sandwiches. We'll be very happy for anyone to be doing other things while they're listening to us. Just briefly about me, I'm Grace Moody Stuart. I'm the Director of Consultancy at the Good Schools Guide, and we have about 25 consultants all over the country, all of whom are recruited from our writing team, and we advise parents about all matters of education, but particularly about what is the right fit for their particular child. So on my left is Sarah Wood. She is the Assistant Head of Boarding at Benenden School. Sarah started as a house mistress at Benenden pre-pandemic in 2019. She's been Assistant Head of Boarding for the past 5 months, so fairly recent. She previously taught biology, amongst other things, at Dulwich College for over 20 years, and so understands London parents, I assume. An additional bonus is that she herself was a teenager at Wickham Abbey. We're very lucky to have someone so well placed to help answer this broad and exciting question, finding the perfect fit for your child beyond London. Benenden is an all-girls school, taking about 560 pupils, mainly boarders, but day children too, from the ages of 11 to 18. The school states on its website, amongst many other things, whilst instilling within the girls the values to which we hold firm of confidence, compassion, courtesy and courage, we prepare them to be professional young women in whatever field of work they choose to pursue in later life. We at the Good Schools Guide say in our review, we wondered how much Princess Anne, former alumni if you didn't know that, would have in common with pupils today. Given the bright, motivated and down-to-earth girls we met, probably quite a lot. And next to Sarah is James Priory, Headmaster of Tonbridge School. James has been Headmaster of Tonbridge since 2018. He previously taught English at Bradford Grammar School and Portsmouth Grammar School, where he was head. Both these schools are independent schools, despite their slightly misleading names. Both are co-ed, day schools. James now finds himself at the helm of an all-boys school, which offers both boarding and day places for pupils aged 13 to 18. There are around 800 pupils in total. That's right. The school's ethos is summed up in 2 words on their website: only connect. We at the Good Schools Guide say in our review, these rounded, engaging young men are destined to go far, we feel, but without a scrap of the entitlement that so often accompanies a top-notch education. Top marks to all involved. Thank you. So, if I could start, just to explain the format of the day, I will be asking questions, but I hope to leave plenty of time for you to ask plenty of questions. So please don't be shy and be thinking of things to ask as we go along. So perhaps I could ask just briefly to each of you, and perhaps start with Sarah, she's to my left, just a brief introduction about your schools, including, I think, important details like the ratio of boarders to day pupils and the percentage of international students.
Yeah, certainly. We only opened our doors to day students a couple of years ago, so we have about 40 day students at the moment. I would perceive that number will grow in the next couple of years as we open up various different coach routes. However, being just an hour away from London, we get an awful lot of London students, and we have a model which isn't flexi-boarding as such, but students are welcome to go home at the weekends. But because we do have about 20% international students, we also have an incredibly busy sort of weekend programme of activities. And so what quite often happens is that parents are saying, "Oh, would you like to come home this weekend?" And the student would like to stay at school. So we try as much as possible to get parents to actually come to the school. They quite often say they're coming to see their daughter. I think they're just coming for a very good Benenden lunch, which we're fairly renowned for. But they come see their daughter, have lunch with them, and then depending on whether the student wants to stay for a busy weekend programme of activities or whether they're actually wanting to have a quieter night, they may then come back to London for the rest of the weekend.
Thank you. So that's interesting. Just a recent intake of day pupils.
Yes.
And that's the way it looks like that will those numbers.
I think the numbers will increase. I mean, our school is about 560 at the moment, and actually part of being a relatively small school is that I hope that we're able to nurture each student individually. However, you also want it to be large enough that there is a niche for every student, and there's always going to be some fellow like-minded souls that they can hang out with and set up societies with, etc. So we don't want to become a huge school, but I think we have the capacity for our day student numbers to increase.
Excellent. Encouraging for London parents, I think. Tonbridge, balance, I mean, give the broad picture in a minute, but the balance of day to boarders?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you were commenting on my own background being both coming from day into boarding, and it's probably fair to say that one of the things that kind of was attractive to me was the balance of boarding and day. So Tonbridge has 800 boys in it. They're aged 13 to 18. The boys very much come from London, South East, but also internationally and from further afield in the UK as well. We have about 60% of the school are boarders and 40% a day. So it's about 450 boarders, 350 day boys. But it's worth saying, I suppose, one of the things I've learned during my time as head is also the significance of the boarding ethos, because that's really what defines the school, and really, I suppose, differentiates us from really, I suppose, particularly from a London day offering in particular, perhaps by example. So the boarding ethos is very profound, and that's something that both our day boys would experience as well as the boarders, because we have quite a significant house system at the school. We have 12 houses, 7 boarding, 5 day, where we're in here, and you're hopefully sneakily getting a sandwich while we're talking now. Well, the boys in all of those houses will be in lunch now with house dining. So that will be the boarders back in their dining rooms in their houses, and the day boys will be in dedicated dining rooms that they have, very much to emulate that experience as well. So the length of the day, the involvement in the co-curricular activities, all of that's very much kind of shared and integrated across the school as a whole. It's worth saying we also, Tonbridge also has a merged prep school actually called New Beacon School, which is based in Sevenoaks, which is a school of just over 300 boys, just about 20 minutes away. And that's been a recent development, I suppose, just thinking about strategic changes as well. And that's a school that also has both a boarding and day ethos. And it's interesting. I mean, our boarders, can come from very, very locally, as I know they will to at Benenden too. But in terms of overall balance, it's worth just saying, I suppose, we have about 100 boys out of the 800 for whom home is overseas. And they'll come from Hong Kong, China, from India, Japan, from the US, from Europe, right around the world. And that's something where we've probably seen greater diversification as well over recent years too. So it's around kind of 17% or so of the school as a whole.
And which is your main entry point? Perhaps James could just answer that first.
Yeah, so our main entry point is at 13. But we then also have an entry point at the beginning of the second year for us GCSEs at year 10, and then again at the sixth form as well.
Right.
And those are points of entry for both boarding and for day. But our main entry would be year 9.
So if London parents were wanting to choose Tonbridge, would they be having to find somewhere? I mean, what would they do for those 2 years if they're at a typical 11?
In year 7 and 8? Well, I suppose typically we would see kind of boys coming through from the prep sector. We also, through our Foundation Award programme, where we are identifying bright, talented boys who are coming from state primary schools. We actually have quite a mature programme where we support boys going into prep schools because we see the value of those 2 years. And I suppose we're in the fortunate position now, thanks to the merger we have with New Beacon, that of course we do then have that a cohort that's also developing there who might well choose to go there for years 7 and 8 that cohort is building in anticipation of coming to Tonbridge at 13.
And getting experience of boarding in those 2 years.
That's right. Yes, either flexi boarding at that point or day. That's right.
And Sarah?
So we have 11 plus entry, 13 plus entry and 16 plus entry. At the moment, we'll have about 40 students joining at 11 plus, and we have got a boarding house dedicated to just the year 7 students, which has been such a success that we're actually extending it to make it a boarding house that's just for year 7 and 8 students, so that when the year group then doubles at 13 plus, they're all joining together and having that sort of slightly new experience of joining their middle school boarding houses. So by having a year 7, year 8 house, it's slightly the best of both worlds, because they get to be very familiar with the school, they get to meet all the older students of their boarding house that they're going into, but they'll also get some of those roles and responsibilities that they would have at the end of year 8 that they would have in a prep school. We'll also have a 16 plus entry. Again, we'll have about 20 students joining at 16 plus. And again, we're hoping that we might be able to expand that going forward.
For the day group.
We have day students joining at 16 plus. We have international students joining at 16 plus. It's a competitive entry point, but yeah, it's growing. There's a lot of demand for it at 16 plus.
Thank you. So a bit more of a general question now. Why might a child be happier boarding or as a day pupil in one of your 2 schools rather than at a London day school? And perhaps, James, you could answer that first.
No, it's been really interesting for me to discover that, if I'm honest, coming into a boarding school setting and really experiencing it at the heart. It's very interesting because it's not unusual for us to have a waiting list of day boys who want to become boarders, and I completely understand why it's that way around, because I suppose typically a lot of families who choose us for boarding are not necessarily coming from a boarding background, and may well be choosing this particularly for exploring it, at least for a particular child. That's what we often see, and it's not unusual, for example, to have a London family looking to consider actually the attractions of being slightly outside of London and the opportunity for the co-curricular, the space for that, and the time for it, but obviously still wanting to be in touch with their child's development and education and want to share in that experience. So what I would say, I think, of the attractions are that the boys who come to us, I think, kind of benefit, if you like, from being able to focus on their school lives in the week. They have time, they have the opportunity to develop more meaningful relationships with each other and with their teachers and the other staff involved in their lives. And they just have greater access to the opportunities available, whether that's through the facilities, through informal as well as formal activities that are on offer. And I think what we find is that the boys, therefore, are able to kind of focus on school life, immerse themselves in the richness of that. Laundry's taken care of, meals are taken care of, homework's taken care of, and then when families kind of typically come along on a Saturday to watch the sport, and then if they're UK-based and London-based, often then taking their sons home then for that night over the rest of the weekend, they've then got kind of 24 hours where they're not actually packing in laundry, schoolwork, but hopefully a bit of food at some point. But there's actually then time to have some quality time away from perhaps some of the commute and away from kind of the nagging about work, because that's what the school does, and and the boys develop motivation to do that whilst they're in school time. So that's what I find talking to families is the big benefit for families, but also for the children themselves.
Yeah, and Sarah, what kind of child would not suit boarding?
I'm a great believer that if you're going to go to any school, you as a student and your parents should both be wanting to join that school. And the only child who I think doesn't suit boarding is somebody who says, I don't want to go there. If they are going with their eyes open, and what Tonbridge as well as Benenden will do is we will open our doors to you as soon as you say you want to come to an open day, and then there are art induction days, there's pre-season sports days, there's taster sessions, there's previews, there's come and stay for the weekend. You can't come for the weekend, come and stay on a Wednesday night. And so we want that student and the parents to be looking forward to starting in September. Then they will enjoy boarding school.
So is there a parent that wouldn't? I mean, they can't join that. They can be on the back seat for the taster days, but is there a parent that wouldn't suit? boarding, and how do you tell? There might be some here.
I mean, I wouldn't say there's a parent who doesn't suit boarding. I think that there is that idea that parents might find it difficult to let go. But I think that's a fairly old-fashioned idea of sort of dropping your son or daughter at the boarding school gates and not seeing them for months at a time. That's not the case now. Parents and staff are working together as teams to bring up your son, your daughter, and to get the most from them. And so that means that there's regular communication between home and school. And so no parent should feel that any guilt at leaving their child at boarding school. They're part of our community.
Yeah, I suppose connected to that, and there may be some parents who really do sort of wrestle with this, is what's the ideal distance from school, in terms of where they should live and how long it would take to come and see them? Is there a kind of what's the right word?
Optimum.
Optimum will do, but it's not the one I'm looking at. Sweet spot is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think. I suppose typically we see kind of families travelling, an hour and a half up to that kind of level. Sometimes it can be a little bit more than that. But I know perhaps coming back on a Sunday evening, for example, dropping sons off, although, transport networks are now opening up with pickups from London on Sunday nights and local transport networks as well to help facilitate that for families. Yeah. That's perhaps less of a concern. And I suppose also with the day boys, I mean, we see that probably given the kind of the scope of the day, that actually it's attractive to those who are perhaps not travelling within an hour in order to make that really work for them. So I think hour and a half to 2 hours probably would be the maximum.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I just want to pick up on that point really about kind of the parental, are there parents who are not necessarily suited to boarding? I think I'm sure, both of us, our schools see this. Parents are exploring so many different opportunities. It is a gradual process of really gaining trust and insight into what a school offers and the way it works. But obviously any great school is going to thrive on close partnership between home and school.
Yes.
And it's about building trust and confidence in each other. And I think it can be quite extraordinary, the partnership that's possible when you're working really closely with a boarding school and the family that offers, in addition to what you offer from home. It's not a kind of either or, it's a together.
And obviously a lot of parents who boarding is a very alien concept will be worried about safeguarding, and particularly currently with mobile phones and everyone's invited and all these things that are coming at us. How do you reassure parents about that aspect? Perhaps Sarah, you could start as you're dealing with girls.
Well, I was thinking more, having come from a London school, I would be worrying more about safeguarding and keeping your child safe, sometimes in a busy city, than in the rural ideals of Kent. We, like any good school, are working very hard on educating our students and keeping them up to date with social media. I think looking at AI coming forward, this is going to be an ever-evolving process. We are, like any school, day or boarding, you work very hard on having safeguarding at the forefront of your recruitment, your training, your visitors accessing schools, and it would be remiss of any school, let alone a boarding school, not to have that at the forefront of the agenda.
And James, so that's really reassuring, I'm sure, but then you've got the balance between keeping people safe and covering them in cotton wool, and obviously these teenage years are very vital for learning that independence and confidence in that sense. So how do you make that? How do you strike that balance?
Well, I think it's I remember having this conversation with one of our alumni actually, who's very involved in the he's very involved in the world of AI. I think he has monthly conversations with Elon Musk, but he belongs to that kind of that category of person who says that if you are in the privileged position of not needing to access the virtual world, you should be putting down your devices and of course making the most of the real world that's around you. And when I asked him, I said, well, look, what do you think our policy should be as a school on mobile phones, on laptops, he said, you don't need them, basically, you don't need them. And And so I think for me I'm just trying to think, it would probably be kind of look up and speak up. So what we've moved to a position, as most schools now have, I know, of asking the children to hand in their mobile phones, and we're wise enough to check that actually they might have another phone on them, of course. so by the time we've completely frisked them, then the whole point of it for boarders and for day boys is about actually getting involved in the actual relationships of the day, talking, taking part, not just sitting on a sofa kind of catching up with download of social media. And the other thing I would say, that coming to your safeguarding point, and I think this is an important thing to kind of test when you talk to a school and talk to the pupils who are in that school, is there a speak up culture? Because things do happen, and children can get it wrong, and that can be in any school setting. And of course we learn from mistakes, but is there a culture in which actually people are genuinely concerned about each other and are willing to kind of say something and seek help if something's not right? So that's really important, and that's something that every school needs to really work at too, because you've got new generations coming through, and it's certainly something we take very seriously. But it comes about ultimately by having great relationships, and you do that, frankly, by putting the phones away and getting out and sharing and doing things together.
That sounds like a breath of fresh air to me. But now, London admissions, and I'm sure a lot of people are here because of this, are notoriously competitive, and primarily because it's very, very focused on academics. How do you think the criteria at Benenden and Tonbridge compare with that London sort of benchmark?
Funnily enough, I was having an argument with a great friend of mine, I hope she's not here, no, good, about this very topic a few days ago, because she was very much sort of saying, well, decided it's all about London and the academic and getting to the top university. Now, I'm a great believer that an A grade student will get an A grade whatever school they go to. And I think it's really important that you're not just looking at those league tables, but you're actually looking at the value added. If a B grade student is getting an A grade, that's what we should be celebrating. And I think that we should be celebrating that value added in the classroom, but I think that we should also be making sure that a student that leaves the school has a global outlook, that they are prepared to stand up in public and to talk to anyone, to be full of confidence, to be educated in the world of AI and beyond. They should have an understanding of economics, whether they're an artist or not. So they do need to have a broad range of education, as well as what I hope, that excellence of teaching.
That's really helpful, Sarah, but it wasn't quite the answer to my question. My question is more about when you're assessing these people. Here, these children at 11 are going off to these assessments and feel incredibly pressurised about the academic requirements. When they're going to Benenden to be assessed, are you really looking at those? Like, how are you assessing that child? Are you only really looking at the maths and English?
So, as well as obviously looking at the ISEB, we actually have our sort of own assessment, and it's done slightly differently. We very much do it as a sort of fun, challenging day that will incorporate some maths questions, will incorporate some English. It might be, though, writing a newspaper article on the inquiry or the challenge that we've set up. Maybe we've had something like a murder mystery scene, and they're getting involved in some science and some forensics, and they're coming up with opinions. They're having to maybe interview characters and find out what went on and come up with their own opinions, where there's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer, but we're showing them how we teach at Benenden, which is very much sort of inquiry-based. And so although they will have some maths tests and an English test and an interview sort of incorporated in that day, actually it should come across as a really fun and challenging day for them. And we're also seeing their character and seeing how they work as a group and how they talk as an individual. So
James, just to complete the answer to that question, what are you looking for when you're assessing them? Which ones will you choose?
Yeah, it's. I mean, because typically we're assessing the children at year 6, and of course we're thinking about them then to joining us in year 9. So it's quite a projection that the parents need, that the children need, as well as ourselves. And so actually, you do, coming back to your point about value add and that thinking about growth, you are looking as far as you can define it for that potential and that spark, that willingness to get involved in activities, which is why a more activity-based assessment process I think is important, because you're looking for that openness to.
Do you do those as well?
We do. That's right. I don't think we don't think we do murder mystery, but I like the idea of that one. I might take that one off.
We have a whole weird range of different
I like that
inquiries.
one very much. But yeah, we do some science, we do some drama. We use the ISEB score, which we feel gives us an insight into aptitudes that the children have at that stage. We rely quite significantly on the child's current school and the insight that they can provide, obviously to rounded character, and we meet the children, spend time with them, through the course of their admissions journey. And I think it's important to say, if for any reason there's doubt or concern about whether they're going to find the kind of academic setting conducive or too challenging as a setting, then we have the opportunity for provisional assessments in year 7, and we recognise that boys often mature that little bit later and need that time to develop potential. So we would also look again at year 7, and I know that means families keeping faith a little bit with us too, but that's all I think of heads of school who we've appointed who come through that route and again, just mature over time. So keeping an open mind. But I just want to come back to the academic point because, I think there's a risk in assuming that if it's not a London day school, that somehow therefore you're kind of compromising in some way academically. We're incredibly proud of the academic intellectual life of Tonbridge, but proud that it's also part, as it is at Benenden, and we do a lot of things together, that it's part of a very rounded experience. So, if you do look at the league tables, you will see Tonbridge in that top 10 over the last 2 years with our results, top performing boys' school at A-level and GCSE. So the boys are achieving some incredible results and progressing to some very, very exciting universities, but they're doing it whilst also maintaining their other lives. And that's the balance you're looking for. And perhaps the final point I'd make is, which is I think why boarding is really worth seriously thinking about academically, is that it gives time for the supercurricular things that aren't always possible to squeeze into a busy day. And
what do you think your best co-curricular activity is at Tonbridge?
The best co-curricular?
I mean, the most popular or the most, what do you think you're known for?
Well, the school has got a fantastic reputation for its sport, and I'm very proud of that. We were pleased to see Zach Crawley doing quite well in the cricket yesterday, and it was nice to have him back with us a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, that's exciting. Seeing him perform, seeing Ben Earl trotting out for England, obviously very exciting. But if I pick those as 2 examples, those are boys who played a broad range of sports. Ben Earl's favourite author is Jane Austen. Zach is a great chess player. These are young men who've got a breadth of interest. And of course, so I'd say sport, whilst that's a strength of the school, come and hear the Symphony Orchestra perform Tchaikovsky's Fourth as they did a couple of weeks ago. It's phenomenal. But it's the super curricular I just wanted to mention, really. And by that, I mean the kind of the competitions, the clubs, the activities that take that learning out of the classroom and really stretch it. So, for example, languages are very strong at the school. 40% of the boys are studying languages post-16, which bucks a real national trend. But we're also doing, debating in Spanish. We hosted the national Spanish debating competitions. We now take part in French drama festivals. These are wonderful opportunities to stretch your learning beyond the classroom. And particularly, I suppose, we see it on the STEM side as well. We're lucky enough to see to have 2 boys in the British Maths Olympiad team, and we've won the very high-profile US maths competition, the Trinity Maths, which has never been won outside of the US before. And Tonbridge have won that 2 years running. I mean, and that's not because we've just got amazing maths brains. It's because the boys spend time together, challenging each other in their maths and presenting to each other, have visiting speakers who are mathematicians of great repute, and they have time to do that. So they enjoy it, and it's the fun. So it's really that's what kind of builds the love of learning and hence the achievements that you see.
And then I just want to give Sarah the opportunity to sing Beneden's
Well, I was
curriculum.
thinking
Before you do, would you, in explaining where your strengths are beyond the classroom, can you also explain this? I love this, obviously, dialogue that you have, and the children get to do things with the other sex, because obviously a lot of parents might be concerned that putting their child in a single sex, it's one thing doing a single sex day school, but a single sex potentially boarding school is quite cloistered.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, when James started talking about STEM, I was thinking about the sort of STEM days that we've hosted, that you've hosted, and we're very much sort of thinking about Benenden students and Tonbridge students presenting to other visiting schools. We're very lucky to have such a sort of close relationship, and I think that's been actually building more and more over the last couple of years. So we'll have anything from our 13 plus entries all getting together for team bonding at the beginning of the year. We'll have them even doing a PSHE day when they've been sort of exploring vaping and why they shouldn't be vaping, and that's been a joint venture. But then we'll also have the social ventures as well as some of the academic and sort of team ventures. So every one of our boarding houses has a twin boarding house at Tonbridge, and this means that socially a boarding house might take their 14-year-olds to laser questing with their twin boarding school. They'll all meet up and they might go laser questing or escape rooms, or bowling is very popular. And it actually means that by the time they are getting to sort of sixth form, they know each other really well. So when we're doing things like prefect training all together, so they'll do leadership courses together, whether they're just socialising together, they know each other really well. And we don't have to organise their social life by the time they're sixth formers, because they've got to know each other so well through formal and informal means. I mean, we've had your choir coming to sing with us. We've had
super. Your very beautiful new Centenary Hall. So
no plans to merge in the future economic.
I think the wonderful thing at the moment is that they have the best of both worlds. So as James has alluded to, and I won't be too rude, boys and girls can mature slightly at different times. You have a wonderfully strong language department. We have a wonderfully strong STEM,
yes.
Which again is rare in some girls' schools or co-ed schools to have girls being quite so strong in STEM. So there's no gender bias in any subjects, and so they can mature happily in their own way. They can be meeting up socially, but on a day-to-day basis, they're not worrying about what they look like or what subject they're studying. But then they can have all the fun of a Friday night.
And I think I'd probably, I mean, from our point of view as a school, we do feel that we're offering a specialism in educating boys, partly just by the way that we're organised and structured. But I think it's probably worth, you mentioned the word cloistered, and you know, my surname's Priory, and that's probably as far as the cloisters go at Tonbridge. Because I think I probably just wanted to paint a slightly different picture for you, because you know, we're on a high street in a market town. You know, we've got a train station 40 minutes into the centre of London. We've got a lot of schools around us, and when you imagine the campus, this is not a kind of campus that's got walls around it that keeps people out and the boys only ever see boys. You know, this is 40% of those boys are coming at, you know, are day boys, as well as 60% them being boarders. But we are very much, you know, as with Benenden, a centre for activities which involve other external organisations. So, you know, our theatre is a very, well, the Moat has the accolade of being the best theatre in Kent. Make of that what you will, but certainly 17,000 people came to watch the pantomime over Christmas. So it's, you know, it's a major centre. The leisure centre, sports centre, has young people from lots of different schools and organisations there. It's home to Tonbridge Athletics, which has had some fairly famous runners around that track in the past. So it's a real hub, I suppose, is my point. So if you're a pupil there, you don't feel like you're in a monastery. You're in a school which is actually also part of its community and synonymous with that. So in that sense, you don't feel as if somehow you're cut off. You just have the benefit, actually, I think, of being in a school which is giving you every opportunity to be an individual, and that's what we feel we're offering.
It sounds like a utopia. I hope everyone's sold. Any questions? Yes.
Is there a divide boarders and day pupils. So I went to see counsellors, it was a lovely school, and I just found that boarders hang out with their boarders, whereas only day people had a separate section, walk of lunch there. And I almost felt like it was like a them and us. Is there more integration? I mean, obviously the boarders have all their leisure time together, weekends together, so the day pupils go home. So I just got the feeling that the day pupils all come out together and the boarders all come out together.
That's a very good question. And obviously, the girls have only, I mean, the day pupils have only started at Benenden. So perhaps James could answer that question initially.
Yeah, I think a really good question. So essentially about the boarders and day, is there a divide between the two? And absolutely, that was my concern when I started at Tonbridge, because I just assumed that would be a fault line to really be vigilant about in the school. And how would I know that? Well, you know it through things like pupil survey responses, satisfaction levels with inspections, but also schools do their own satisfaction surveys, looking at participation rates, in the activities that are on offer, performance. Were you seeing an obvious kind of divide? And often in a school, you might see a year group where things dip a bit, or maybe it's between boys and girls in a co-ed school, different sense of satisfaction. From my co-ed experience, that's typically what I would have seen. So you wanted to work at that. When I came to Tonbridge, it was extraordinary. There was just no separation at all in terms of satisfaction levels or performance between boarders and day. It just wasn't there. And so I've not. It doesn't mean I've stopped being vigilant. And I had a son who joined the school as a day boy coming into the sixth form, so I was particularly kind of mindful of it at the time. But I think it's because the boarding ethos that we have is very much one that everyone kind of buys into and shares. So the fact that the day boys do have distinctive houses of their own with gardens, with a house master, mistress, with that sense of team around them, exactly the same experience. And when you look at the performance in competitions like house music or debating or sport, the day houses are performing just as strongly as boarding houses, have just as much participation. So I think that's actually something that I think is a real evidence of the success of the integration of the school. But I think it is something that you're right to be vigilant about when visiting a school.
Would you like to?
Well, we have a different model in that all our day girls will actually belong to a boarding house. So within a boarding house, you might have 5 to 15 sort of day girls that will have their own sort of space within a dormitory. They'll have their own sort of desk, wardrobe, and then they will have the whole pastoral team associated with the boarding house looking after them as well. So in the same way that you will have a pastoral team looking after your day students. So we will have day students that we're trying to get rid of at 9 o'clock at night. Go home, because they are very much part of that boarding culture, and they're buying into the boarding ethos.
Any other questions? Yes.
How do you prepare for US universities to do the see raising demand for this abroad?
Yeah, there's a raising demand across the country. More are going to US universities. So any good school like us will have a good careers department with people who are specialised in gearing them towards the US universities. And that talk will start when they're in year 10. That preparation will start. So we have literally got, at the end of this week, all our year 10s starting their careers path, looking forward to the future and working with our careers team and having individual meetings with career advisors. And so we can start helping them and nurturing them towards US universities if that's what they're looking at.
Are you able to remember anyone who went to any US university last year at the end of last year?
Yes. Well, sorry, the first name that came to mind was
I mean, I didn't
Priory,
need the name,
which was
but
2 years ago.
just the university.
But, yes, we've had Stanford recently. We've had, it was the first one I was thinking of, but I'm afraid I'm a biologist and my biologists went to Oxford or Cambridge, most of them, and not to US universities. But yes, we get 2 or 3 going to US universities each year.
And how many from Tonbridge go to US university?
Yeah, so we it's been very interesting. We've certainly seen an increased interest, and to some extent we've been deliberately encouraging that because there are some extraordinary opportunities, and we've got boys progressing on scholarships. So from our Foundation Award programme this year, we were actually thrilled that a boy has actually got a fully paid place at Princeton Boston this year and is thriving there. Again, another boy who was from foundational background at MIT. So we know there's some amazing opportunities there, and it might be through sports scholarships or other awards as well. But we've seen a growth. So it's interesting that probably we've typically seen around 15 or so when I kind of came to the school. The coming year 12 coming through into the upper sixth next year is around 40. Right. So there's been quite a marked increase. We ran a trip ourselves actually for year 10 to the East Coast to go and visit some universities, meet some alumni in those as well, which was very insightful for those children able to do that. And this year we've got a new partnership with MIT, who have a very interesting kind of program called the Global Teaching Lab, where they send their undergrads out in their third year to go and spend a month teaching in schools. And we were excited to have the opportunity to become one of those schools where they've come. So in January we had a biologist and a computer scientist teaching in the school and contributing to that super curriculum I was referring to earlier. So that's to be honest, that's been really a response to demand.
Yes, question at the back there.
What proportion of your children come in at A level?
Yeah. Proportion of children at A levels.
Yes, so we typically have around 20 or so.
Just 1 minute.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, for a boy, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, so we would typically have around 20 boys would join us in the sixth form. It does vary a little bit year on year, and it's obviously not dissimilar to what we were hearing about Benenden. It's a competitive entry at that point.
20 into a cohort of how many?
Into a cohort of about 150 to 160. Yeah. And that will be both boarders and day.
And how well do they integrate?
Terribly, it's awful. They clearly should have come earlier. No, they integrate very well. I mean, obviously, it's a very natural transition point, of course, and we also, we see boys coming to us from the sixth form because they're also interested then in particular university destinations. They want that support with that, and I think that's what's lovely about the house system. It comes back a little bit to that boarding and day. Do you feel second class in the school, or do you feel the school is yours? And the house system is just very swiftly gives everyone a sense of place and connection within a larger school. So genuinely, it works really well.
There was a question, yes.
How suitable is the boarding environment for children who are neurodiverse or on the spectrum?
Yeah, do you want to answer that one by one? Are you more interested in Benenden answer or
both?
either?
Just generally.
Okay.
I think that any student needs that individual nurturing, and I think that any school needs to have a strong SEN team. And I think that the boarding aspect of it, where we find that we might have to think a little bit more in terms of boarding, might be things around food, for instance. So they might need to, because quite often medications can actually affect, obviously, appetite. So we might be looking at making sure that we give that range of food. And I think that we actually have a very good range, but we're constantly reevaluating to make sure that we are giving our neurodiverse students as much access to everything that they need. We have a very strong Senko team that we work with to make sure that we are contributing or allowing them to fulfill all their promise, whether it's in the classroom and socially within the boarding house.
I think socially is the key question, isn't it, for you? Because once you're, giving up your child to another... Yeah. So how do you manage?
We will have a range of, say, dormitories, and it might be that you're wanting to make sure that you're thinking with every individual, though, and this includes neurodiverse, you're going to be constantly thinking about what is best for that individual. And that will be anything from providing quiet spaces to, we're very lucky, we have the most amazing countryside around us. We're in 250 acres of parkland. So there's a wonderful sort of natural mental health well-being just by going for a lovely walk in our rose garden. So you're making sure that there are safe spaces, but you're also encouraging them to make sure that they are participating and helping them with any social skills.
Can I just follow up, though? Who is doing that? Who are the individuals? What are their roles?
There will be individuals within the Senko team working with them, but also the role of we have a very strong team within each boarding house. So, as I said, we will have a house mistress, house master, a deputy, a resident matron, a day matron, an evening matron. So there's a real strong team of adults that are all going to be working to help your student, to help your child, whether neurodiverse or not, and to try and make sure that they're in the best environment for them.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Would you like to hear from James as well? Yes,
Yeah.
Lee.
Yeah, I think in simple terms, I come back to the house system because the housemaster or house mistress is the main point of contact between home and school. That's the main, and in the way that our structure works. And so the housemaster, house mistress has got about 60, 65 children that they're kind of responsible for. And our houses are vertically mixed. So you've got a tutor group from each of the 5-year groups from the age of 13 through to 18. Now, I mentioned that because, therefore, if you're a child in the school and a neurodiverse child, then actually you're in a tutor group of about 12 to 14 boys who have got their own base, who meet together regularly, who will have lunch together. We have family Fridays and all of that where they mix up the age groups in the house, which I know the boys really enjoy too. But essentially, you've got that small kind of group that starts to really knit its relationships together. And the other advantage of course, of that kind of life of having things like house dining and the time when there's just downtime rather than just rushing to activities all the time, is that the housemaster, house mistress have got the opportunity to have eyes-on touch points with the children to see how they're doing. And all of that creates quite a supportive family environment. And what I've found with children who are neurodiverse is the extraordinary tolerance and understanding from their peers, because they're not in a year group necessarily all the time. Of course, they do lots of things in the year group. They do whole school games all the time. But they've also got this little family unit that just looks out for them. And I can think of one particular individual, just comes to mind, and he's talking to his grandmother not long ago, just said he's just so happy. And he has got all kinds of wonderful idiosyncrasies and levels of knowledge that the other boys don't have. And of course, some behaviours that also that might present as quirky, but actually the understanding and support from the others means that those are not drawn attention to. And I mention it because actually this little lad there was a little moment this morning in chapel. We had 800 boys in chapel. My second master, who's Northern Irish, was giving us his best Seamus Heaney impersonation and was reading this beautiful poem and was deeply moved from the pulpit, when suddenly everyone was distracted because the boys, in my mind, had walked in slightly late into chapel. And normally he would have gone into the lady chapel next door, but he, slightly unaware, had decided to come straight in. And as he walked down, he did a high five with another boy who put his hand out for him, took his seat in the chapel, and immediately everything calmed down again. But that little lad was entirely felt at home. And what's lovely, actually, is the response from the school, which is actually a kind of, yes, surprise initially, but then actually very quickly resettle, integrate. And that's the kind of dynamic you see on a smaller scale in the house. And for me, that's what really grounds. But similarly to Benenden, we have a very strong learning strategies department, which offers and shares expertise, both for families and indeed for colleagues teaching children. But reasons for confidence is what I would say.
Excellent. I think, we could probably have one more question, but we're coming to a close now. Yes, there's just a question just here.
So it's actually just a follow up to what percentage of the students are neurodiverse in both schools?
James, do you want to go first?
I'm looking at my resident expert over there. I have a wonderful director of admissions who was also head of learning strategies, and I'm going to be naughty, Haley, because it's not a figure I particularly have in my head. So, is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very
It's really, really difficult when you start talking about quantitative data when it comes to SEN, because, of course, in independent settings, we are quick to identify. We have the ability to diagnose because of affordability and pathways that we have. And so you will more than likely see an increased level of SEN numbers in an independent setting than you would in a state setting. Quite a lot of our boys who exist on our SEN register would not actually be on an SEN register in a state setting, but they do qualify for a range of access arrangements. So it's how you define SEN. Essentially, we have around, the national average is around 12% of SEN children in any type of setting, and we hover around the 15 to 17% mark. But that's because we are potentially diagnosing candidates who would not ordinarily be identified, and of course we're including in that any kind of need. need. So it may not be that there is neurodiversity within that figure, but actually that candidate will qualify for an access arrangement. So, for example, if you have a diagnosis of hypermobility, there is no necessarily neurodiverse kind of combination, although we do have comorbid features as part of hypermobility. But generally, a hypermobile diagnosis will essentially just allow you to have access to laptop use and potentially rest breaks and examinations. That boy will sit on our SEN register because we want to track that provision. We want to make sure those access arrangements are absolutely appropriate to need and continue to be so as he grows throughout the school. But essentially, would you classify that as an SEN? Yes, quantitatively, but in terms of level of need, it's very, very low. So you will see an elevated level of SEN numbers, I suppose, in independent settings, but it's not necessarily because those needs are particularly complex. We have a huge range of cognitive need and sensory need and sometimes physical need as well in the school. We meet those needs very, very well. But to answer the question, it's around 17 to 15% compared to 12% nationally.
That was an incredibly helpful answer. Thank you. Can you very briefly, because we really must stop, but very briefly, Sarah, do you want to say, are you able to say how many?
Well, I'd say that we were probably very similar, actually. I was going to say about 15%. However, it's neurodiversity, the whole thing is it's a range. And so really it's where you're wanting to cut off, say that's neurodiverse. It's the difficulty, but about 15%.
Thank you so much. Thank you for asking such excellent questions as well. And big clap for Stuart and Vince.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince.